honorable guests, respected academics, practitioners and researchers from Bangladesh and all around the world. Good afternoon from this side of the globe, and I hope I'm audible to everyone. I am Shahrima Tanjin Arni, your host for today's lecture, and I warmly welcome you all to Professor Shah Alam Memorial Lecture 2021. This lecture marks the second season of Professor Dr. Shah Alam Constitutional Law Moot Court competition organized by ELCOP. And it's an absolute pleasure and honor to have with us today as the keynote speaker of today's memorial lecture, Dr. Jaclyn L. Neo, Director, Center for Asian Legal Studies, National University of Singapore. Muhammad Shah Alam was a chairman of Bangladesh Law Commission and the founding father of Faculty of Law, University of Chittagong. He was a former professor at the Department of Law, University of Rajshahi. He was also a valiant freedom fighter and a renowned academic. He is considered the pioneer of clinical legal education movement in Bangladesh. He briefly studied economics at University of Dhaka at the time of Bangladesh Liberation War. After that, he went to the former Soviet Union on government scholarship for higher studies, and there he studied for 10 years successfully and obtained graduation, post-graduation, and PhD degrees from People's Friendship University of Russia. Upon completion of his higher studies, Dr. Shah Alam joined Rajshahi University Faculty of Law as an assistant professor, where he has served Rajshahi University for almost a decade. In 1992, he joined the Chittagong University as an associate professor and as the founding dean of the recognized Faculty of Law and the founder chairman of the Department of Law in University of Chittagong. One of the pioneers of clinical legal education in Bangladesh, he introduced this particular method of legal education in Chittagong University. In 1996, he became a full professor of law. During 1999 to 2000, he worked as a member of the Bangladesh Law Commission. Dr. Alam has published 4 books on international law and constitutional law and has edited for several years the Chittagong University Journal of Law. He has a good number of publications in reputed research journals at home and abroad, and he was a Japan Foundation Fellow from 1995 to 1996 at the Tokyo University Faculty of Law and a senior Fulbright Fellow in 2001 to 2002 at the New York University School of Law. Unfortunately, we had lost Professor Dr. Shah Alam last year. However, to commemorate his memories and to celebrate his contribution to the legal fraternity in Bangladesh, ELCOP has organized Professor Shah Alam Memorial Lecture 2021 on freedom of religion in the age of social media. Now, I'd like to call Dr. S.M. Masum Billah, Director ELCOP, to deliver the welcome speech of today's lecture.
Thank you. Honorable Professor Mizanur Rahman, esteemed colleagues, and members of legal fraternity, Shubho Aporanno, a very good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. It's a beauty. It's a beauty to see such an august gathering. I note the presence of more than 70 people, enlightened virtual audience at the moment, and I'm sure with the passage of time, some more will join us. This also indicates the popularity of Dr. Jaclyn in Bangladesh. I have got a mixed feeling at the moment. It was only the other day Professor Shah Alam was with us. And last year we organized in his lifetime the first Shah constitutional law Moot competition. But today, he is no more with us. However, I feel that he is around, somewhere around. And I feel that he is offering his innocent, benign smile from another world. The topic today, law and religion, freedom of expression of the lecture, which is the theme of this lecture today, was very close to heart of Professor Alam, I'm sure. And he was a person with high moral heft, wanted to see a tolerant, peaceful, secular, pluralist society. We still can sense a smell of his teaching and lawyering philosophy. Empowerment through law of the common people proudly is carrying forward the lamp he lit, either being as a founder of the ELCOP or as a teacher of many legal giants in Bangladesh, include ourselves. We have been enriched by the teachings and nobleness he left for us, because nobleness kindleth nobleness. How can I properly express my gratitude to Professor Jaclyn Neo? I recall with fondness my meet with you and Professor Theolian in Thailand Constitutional Law Moot Conference, and then our joint work on treatment of religion, of religious offenses in common law, Asia. It has been an wonderful experience to be known with all of you at the National University Singapore Law Faculty as well as Center for Asian Legal Studies. I also note the presence of your colleagues. Please accept our love, respect for taking no time to accept our invitation, Jaclyn. ELCOP is at its 21. We are championing the idea of rebellious lawyering, as very fondly coined by the founder of ELCOP and renowned human rights educationist of Bangladesh, our mentor, Professor Dr. Mizanur Rahman. From that perspective, ELCOP is a virtue. It is a dream. We cherish a dream that students of today, future lawyers, will be lawyering with the poor, because ELCOP's vision is lawyering with the poor, is lawyering for justice. As such, our mission is to do better, to establish a better society than it was today, than it was yesterday. As such, we have chosen this timely topic and invited Professor Jaclyn Neo. With these few words, I welcome all of you to join this lecture. I back to Arni to invite Professor Jaclyn Neo. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Dr. S.M. Masum Billah. A graduate of NUS Faculty of Law and Yale Law School, Jaclyn is scholar of comparative constitutional law, as well as law and religion in Asia. She also has an emerging research interest in access to justice issues in Singapore. Jaclyn is a recipient of multiple academic scholarships from NUS, including the NUS Overseas Graduate Scholarship. During her time at Yale Law School, where she completed her Masters of Laws and JSD degree, she co-founded the JSD program's now flagship annual doctoral scholarship conference and the Yale Law School's Debating Law and Religion series. Jaclyn is a principal investigator and co-principal investigator of multiple competitive research grants from the Ministry of Education, the Singapore Judicial College, Humboldt University of Berlin and NUS Joint Project, and the NUS Law and Melbourne Law School Research Partnership. She has received awards for her scholarship many times. Her article on domestic incorporation of international human rights law in a dualist state won the Asia Air Book of International Law's DLA International Law Prize in 2017. In recognition of her research on religious freedom in Southeast Asia, she was awarded the SHAPE SEA Research Award. Jaclyn currently sits on the editorial board of the Asian Journal of Comparative Law, the International Journal of Constitutional Law blog, the Asian Yearbook of International Law, and the Journal of Law and Religion. She is also a contributing editor to Jaclyn, the Journal of Things We Like. Jaclyn has been invited to serve on multiple international committees, including the Program Committee of the Law and Religion section of the Association of American Law Schools and the Organizing Committee, Younger Scholars Forum, International Academy of Comparative Law from 2016 to 2018. She is an elected council member of the International Society for Public Law and is founding co-chair of the Singapore chapter of ELCOP. She sits on the inaugural International Advisory Board of the University of Otago's Center for Law and Society and will be a steering committee member of the Chinese University of Hong Kong Center for Comparative and Transitional Law. Jaclyn was appointed director of the Center of Asian Legal Studies of NUS in January 2020 and serves on the advisory board of the NUS Victim Care Unit. She maintains a strong connection to the legal profession and sits on the Singapore Academy of Law and Law Reform Committee and the Executive Committee of the Asian Law Association, Singapore. In February 2020, she was appointed professional fellow in the Singapore Attorney General Chambers Academy. I'm sure we are eagerly waiting to hear directly from her. So without delaying any more time, I'd like to invite Dr. Jaclyn L. Neo to deliver the keynote speech of Professor Shah Alam Memorial Lecture 2021.
Thank you, Arni. I must say, as you were reciting my bio, I started to feel slightly embarrassed by the length with which I have written this. So thank you very much for persisting to the end. A very warm welcome to everyone for attending today's lecture. I would like to first thank Professor Masum Billah for this kind invitation to deliver this lecture. Of course, to Muhammad Azhar, who has been generously taking his time to respond to my many queries. It is my deep honor to deliver today's lecture commemorating Professor Shah Alam. Even though I did not have the privilege of meeting him while he was still with us, I have heard many good things about him and met many of his students from Bangladesh. And so it is really a deep honor for me to be delivering this lecture in the name of one of Bangladesh's academic greats. Now, I've been asked to, I will be speaking today about social media and religious freedom. And I do have some slides. I figured that this is going to Zoom can be a little bit long. So I have actually prepared some slides. So I will start now by sharing my slides. If you can bear with me. Does this look okay? Can you see the slides? Yes?
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you. So I really appreciate this opportunity to think more carefully about freedom of religion in this current age of social media that we all live in. And in sort of reflecting about what freedom of religion means in this very interesting digitalization era that we live in, I thought I would sort of divide my lecture into three parts. The first would be to look at how digitalization and social media is changing the way we live generally, to consider the way in which the impact of technology has had on our lives. That will be the first part of my lecture. The second part of my lecture would then go on to reflect on how digitalization and social media more specifically is changing the way we think about religion, as well as the way in which we experience and practice religion. And the third part of my lecture will go on to consider how these changes is transforming or impacting the way we need to understand freedom of religion, which of course is commonly said to be one of the oldest international human rights, and sometimes considered to be the first right. So 3 parts to this lecture. First, how is technology and digitalization changing the way we live? Secondly, how is it changing the way we experience and understand religion? And thirdly, how is it changing the way we understand freedom of religion? So without further ado, now it is almost trite for us to say that the world is becoming more digital today. I mean, the very fact that we are now meeting on Zoom is itself another manifestation and becoming a rather banal one of the power of the internet in connecting people across the world and facilitating and sometimes accelerating the flow of information and the amount of interaction that we can have together. Now, this is not just an impressionistic view of the internet. The data itself shows this remarkable acceleration of digitalization across the world. If you look at this I would say the most comprehensive report on data usage globally from Data Reporter Global Overview report, as of January 2021, what we are seeing is more than half of the world are internet users. So here we see that there's a total population of 7.83 billion. And within this, 5.22 billion are unique mobile phone users, and 4.66 billion of the population, which forms almost 60% of the population, are actually internet users. And among these internet users are active social media users. Now, the 4.2 billion does not actually represent unique users because the data actually looks at accounts rather than users, and these accounts could be businesses, non-individuals, even animals, right? So, but just think about these numbers. We're talking about billions of people who are on the internet, some daily and some for extended periods of time, and many of them are active social media users. Now, just in the last year alone with COVID-19, we've actually seen this expansion of internet users. The increase is expected to continue to accelerate across time. So just in the 1 year, we've seen a growth from 4.54 billion internet users to 4.66 billion internet users. About 120 million people have started to go online, which they had not done previously. Now, if you were curious about sort of the global spread, which I was, if we look at the share of global internet users by region, you will see that actually Asia represents the majority of global internet users in the world. So if you just look at Eastern Asia, Southeast Asia, Southern Asia, Western Asia, and Central Asia, and if we were to aggregate these numbers, we're talking about 57.4% of global internet users are located in Asia alone. Now, this is a staggering number. You think about these being billions of users. More than 2 billion internet users are located in Asia alone. And so if you think about the impact that the internet has on all our lives, and the fact that the impact is to some extent concentrated in our region, I think this should cause us to pause for some reflection as to whether this is a positive impact, a negative impact, and how do we actually ensure that the impact of the internet on our activities is something that we are constantly reflecting upon, and is something that we ensure is not getting out of hand, that we have some degree of control over what this impact looks like. Now, as I've mentioned, the global social media usage over time has also increased. And these are not unique users, but even if you look at 4.2 billion accounts, as compared to 2.31 in 2016, 4.2 billion accounts of social media accounts over time represents a significant and exponential increase. So what does this rise in internet usage and the rise in global social media usage actually mean for religion? Now, before we sort of go there, I think it's important for us to understand what we mean by social media. Now, social media is often one of those things where we all use the term, we all sort of know what these terms mean, but if we were to ask ourselves to define this term, there can be some difficulties. So there is, for those of you who are technically inclined, there is a definition of social media that is used and proposed by Jaclyn and Heinlein, which talks about a group of internet-based applications that are built on ideological and technological foundations of Web 2.0, and that allows the creation and exchange of user-generated content. Now, this is important because Web 2.0 creates platforms whereby users could engage in a participatory and collaborative fashion to create content. And user-generated content refers to content that is created by you and me, that's not sort of necessarily created with a commercial market in mind. We're not talking about big corporations creating content for consumption by consumers, but we're talking about users and consumers themselves creating this content. This allows for an amount of individual creativity to be disseminated to a wide audience, and it is publicly available. So these sort of two technicalities allow us to sort of think through what exactly are the common characteristics of social media. Now, Schechter and Tirosh actually identifies 4 common characteristics of social media, which is really important for us to think through the impact of social media on religious experience. The first is interactivity. So you will see now that social media interactivity is key to social media, in a sense that it allows that instantaneous interaction between persons, sometimes instantaneous, sometimes slightly delayed, but the interactivity is very fast. It allows us to have that many-to-many communications. The fact that I can put up content online, and many people can create content and put it online and disseminate it to an infinite number of people is crucial to that. And these infinite number of people can then provide their feedback and interact back with the original content creator. That sort of connectivity and interactivity is crucial to our understanding of social media. A second common characteristic is mobility, which is the idea that one could have access to social media and the content on social media anywhere and everywhere. All you need to do is have internet connection. So it allows it means that we are no longer limited by locality. Jurisdictions, in that sense, don't make sense anymore, because I can connect to content that is far from where I am, and that user who is actually creating the content can also connect to me wherever I am. So mobility is another very important aspect of social media. And again, if you think through what this means for religious experience, it means that I can access a religious worship or a religious sermon somewhere around the world without any limitations to my locality. The only limitation really is what is your bandwidth. Thirdly is abundance. Again, this is very important because abundance speaks of the ability to store vast amounts of information and without limitations, right? The only limitation is storage space, but even that has significantly expanded. I mean, in the past, you had these little thumb drives, right? That could maybe take up to 1 gigabyte, and that was already a lot. But today you could store in trillion gigabytes of information online, and you can store it in these cloud storage spaces. So there is no more that initial limitation in terms of how much resource and data one can access and store. And again, this has significant impact on religion, which to some extent has always relied on certain sacred texts and relied on certain information and wisdom being held by a group of persons with authority. Because if you think about religious authority, it is the authority to pronounce on certain religious texts. Now, if there is an abundance of information, an abundance of data available, and anyone can access that data, it challenges the way in which we think about religious authority, as an example. And thirdly is multimedia. This refers to the possibility that I can create images, I can share videos, I can share a variety of different medium, a variety of different photos, videos, texts, all at once or at different points in time. So the interactivity, mobility, abundance, and multimedia aspects are crucial to what we understand to be social media today. And so really, it is more than Facebook and Twitter, even though these are actually among the most famous social media platforms, but it could cover a whole range of platforms and collaborative activity. Wikipedia, blogs, content communities like YouTube, social networking sites like Facebook, Instagram, virtual social worlds, virtual game worlds, these have sometimes also been included in the definition of social media. Now, going back to data reportals, global data report created with We Are Social and Hootsuite. Facebook remains the world's most used social media platforms. YouTube and the second, WhatsApp, FB Messenger, Instagram, WeChat, TikTok, and so on. So this means that there are 2.7 million people, 2.7 million Facebook users, YouTube users, and so on. And they are all congregating on certain social media platforms and interacting with one another. And this also is reflected in the amount of time people are using social media, from 1 hour 51 minutes to 2 hours 25 minutes. This is only going to increase over time. And I would suspect that some of us actually spend way more time than 2 hours 25 minutes. So how does this sort of change religion or change the way we experience religion? I've already mentioned a few in discussing the definitions of social media, but let me sort of put everything in a more systematic fashion. I think there are at least 3 ways in which social media and the digitalization is changing religion. And in order for us to really understand this, we have to see that this relationship actually is an evolving one. We've seen the religion and the internet actually engage in different ways, and the technological advances have actually then created new changes, new ways in which this interaction actually takes place. So before I look at the transformation, I think it's important for us to look at a little about how religion and the internet have interacted over time. Now, I've divided this up broadly into three different sort of ways, three different waves of this relationship. The first is that religion became online, so religion online. The second is where religion becomes transformed by the online presence, so online religion, and thirdly, digital religion. Let me explain. Religion online, this was when the internet started to become accessible to a wider range of people. This actually was a very sort of infant stage of this relationship between the internet and religion. First, religion online refers to the online transposition of activities and narratives of religious groups. What does this mean? It means that you have these offline groups, offline religious groups discovering the internet and saying, hey, I can create a presence online. And so what happened was that they created websites, they created mailing lists for emails and so on. Now, at this stage, religion online was still a very sort of flat kind of relationship. This is because the primary mode of interaction was really very limited. It was primarily informational. These websites were reproducing offline narratives and activities. They were basically using the internet for the dissemination of information, as well as to facilitate religious activities that were actually happening off sites primarily. So it still remained very flat, very limited, because it entailed one-to-many communication. The second stage was when the online started to modify the way we think about religion and the way religion is experienced. This sort of happened in the later part of 2000s when social media was starting to emerge. Now, this was a period where the internet became a little bit more interactive. You were seeing the proliferation of chat rooms, forums, blog communities, and so on. Now, this meant that the online component was actually changing the way we understand the religion component, because you could have an online community that was completely not dependent on there being an offline community. So you could have a chat room of people coming together talking about religious content, and they may never meet offline. So it's not dependent on any offline narratives or activities or presence. This creates a new way for people to experience religion that is conditioned by this interconnectivity. And in addition, this is when you started to have visual enhancements of the internet being being introduced into the aesthetics of religion. So here these sort of new interactive potentials created the ability for many-to-many communications. Many people can come together to interact with many more people. What we see now, and perhaps we're even sort of moving further from that, but this is the era of the social media, is that now we're seeing religion becoming digital. And this is no longer just a modification of offline religion, but we see through social media platforms drastically transforming the internet and accelerating the levels of interconnectivity and interactivity. Of course, coupled with the amount of time people are starting to spend on the internet as well as on social media platform, you see the progressive blurring of line and this integration between online and offline religiosity. So it means no longer that religion is going online and the online is simply a representation of what is offline, but that the online is actually transforming what is offline. So you have these, for instance, proliferation of social media accounts by or dedicated to religious personalities, and these are accessible to believers. I mean, you could follow Pope Francis, or you could follow churches on Twitter, on Facebook, and so on Instagram, and so on. And when you follow them, you can also interact with them. So it creates that direct interaction or ability to directly interact with these religious groups and personalities. In addition, you start to have more mobile apps with religious content. You could have a confessions app, for instance, for the Catholics and so on. So this is an era of digital religion. The idea that religion is no longer just an offline activity transposed to the online or slightly modified by the online, but the fact that religion itself is being transformed by this digitalization, because social media is allowing many more communications and instantaneously. So this transforms the idea of how we experience religion. More specifically, I said that there were 3 ways. The first is the transformation of religious practices and interactions to adapt to social network logic. What do I mean by this? Instagram, Twitter, there are ways, there's a logic to how these platforms work. You create a tweet, you're limited by the number of words. When you create an Instagram post and you want it to look good, you need to have certain images. If you create a Facebook post, you also there's a certain logic, a certain aesthetic involved in creating these posts. And as religion goes online and engages through these social media platforms, they have to also play by the rules of these social media platforms, play by the norms of these social media platforms, which means that videos, images, posts, infographics, and other visuals, they will have to come up with all of these in order to suit the logic of those social media platforms. And so while the religious content remains important, it has to be sort of shaped by the aesthetics and the requirements of these social media platform. When you write a tweet, you can't just if you wanted to write a tweet on, let's say, a Quranic verse, you have to make sure it fits within the character limit. Or if you want to write a tweet on a biblical verse, you can't just copy and paste the entire chapter. You have to actually sort of fit it within the character limit. If you had an Instagram post, you have to ensure the aesthetics of the Instagram post is something that will be appealing to users. So in some ways, there's always a worry and perhaps a risk that this social network logic could then transform religious practices and interactions to become a competition for clicks and views. Now, I think that this transformation of religious practices and interactions to adapt to social network logic can only accelerate, especially if we think about COVID-19 having limited the ability for believers to come together and to worship together or to sort of fellowship together. And so because of COVID-19, the ability of religious organizations to keep this offline activity has become limited, the online activities then become even more important, because this and so conforming to this social network logic might become even more crucial to the religious organization's ability to keep believers connected. Now, secondly, the second way in which social media is transforming or changing religion is and I've alluded to this earlier, is the fact that it is transforming established structures of religious authority and narratives. Now, in the past, you would have a religious authority having sort of studied religious texts or religious ideas and having acquired a certain amount of wisdom and authority within the religious organization. But with social media, we're seeing a change in who can speak for the religion. Now, This means that religious content is no longer restricted to established groups or to established offline organization or to established authorities. Anyone can be a social influencer of religion. Anyone can be a religious blogger, a religious YouTuber, a religious Instagrammer, a religious TikToker. Anyone can start a podcast on religion. And so it no longer is dependent on your learning, no longer is dependent on your background, no longer dependent on there being some kind of soft structure or some kind of certification that comes that shall put someone in a position to speak about religion. Anyone can be a social influencer of religion. This is, on the one hand, could be said to benefit religion because now it is no longer being controlled by a small group of elites, religious elites, but that anyone with faith could then sort of proclaim what their faith, could expound on the religion itself. So there is a great potential for individuals to create new narratives and aesthetics about the intersection of religion and gender, ethnicity, sexuality, and so on. And also to challenge or subvert these authority structures offline. So one could say that this could allow for more progressive interpretation of religion. At the same time, there is also a worry that there is no accountability or oversight structure available for these social influences. How does one know if one proclaims the proper interpretation of religion? How do we ensure that the interpretation of religion is one that advances the sort of values of that religion? There is no sort of structure of authority or oversight to allow for that sort of moderation, if you like, of these, or sort of a check on these social influences. At the same time, what is really interesting, and some research is being done on this, is that some of these social influences could also be affirming existing ideologies, religious narratives, and authority, in the sense that the churches or mosques and so on could also be using these individuals to affirm a sort of more traditionalist perspective on religion and so on. So really what is happening is this idea of authority, established structures of religious authority, is being changed by social media because of its, in a sense, more democratic and more horizontalized nature. The third, I think, way in which social media is changing the way we understand religion is the collapsing of the real and the virtual. As I mentioned, digital religion really is no longer just about religion going online, but digital religion is the idea that religion is also being transformed by these online interactions. And so if we think about the way we live our lives now, is there really, how do we sort of carefully delineate what is real and what is virtual? Is the fact that something happened virtually, if something happened, if an interaction happened online, is that not real? Some might say it is very real. And in fact, it could have very real consequences on the way I live my material life. So the distinction of real and virtual is no longer so easily found. And so it's no longer just the fact that we are bringing the real world to the virtual, but that the virtual can exist on its own and is invading and changing the real world. So this means that online sociality can change offline behavior. So for instance, one could listen to a religious ceremony online and be transformed by that religious ceremony and be, for instance, motivated to perform offline charity. At the same time, on the other extreme, and this is what many governments are worried about, one could also be listening to some seemingly religious speech online and be radicalized to accept more extremist views in religion, and this could result in offline violence. So while this collapsing of real and virtual is on one hand giving voice to the marginal and possibly allowing for sort of change to happen in the real world, it could also allow for new forms of social harm, cyberbullying, cyberstalking, doxing, and also creating sort of conditions for better behavior and worse behavior. For instance, as I've mentioned, what governments are worried about is terrorism. So digital religion and social media is sort of coming together in a transformative way, such that religious practices and interactions are being transformed to adapt to social media such social network logic. I'm summarizing the 3 points I just made. It is transforming established structures of religious authority and narratives, as well as collapsing the real and the virtual. What does this mean for religious freedom? If religion itself and the way religion is practiced is being transformed, what does this mean for religious freedom protection? Now, religious freedom, I'll go back to this, but religious freedom is sometimes considered to be the first right, or the oldest internationally recognized human right. Now, there's an international law consensus or international human rights consensus about the content of religious freedom. It's found in Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and so on. Now, there is some contestation as to whether or not this is a true consensus, but I wanted to sort of raise it right now in order for us to have this discussion about how religious freedom is being changed. The first is the idea of internal freedom, which is the right to choose and change one's religion. The second is the external freedom to manifest religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance alone or in community with others in public or private. The third is the idea that one should not be coerced to have freedom to have or adopt a religion. Fourth is non-discrimination. 5 is the rights of parents and guardians to ensure the religious and moral education of their children in conformity with their own convictions. 6, corporate freedom and legal status for religious organizations, including the autonomy to manage their own affairs. 7, ensuring that any limits on permissible restrictions on external freedom are prescribed by law, and only for the purposes of protecting public safety, order, health, morals, and here's important, fundamental rights of others, and that these limits are necessary, proportionate, and not excessive. And lastly, non-derogability from the right to freedom of religion and belief, even in times of public emergency. Now, you'll see that actually the idea of religious freedom is multifaceted. Okay, so there's a multitude of ways in which the social media transformation could impact the way religious freedom is practiced. But I want to sort of highlight only 3, considering that we only have a limited amount of time. So the first is this. Social media is amplifying and aggravating and accelerating some rights conflict that already exists even before social media, the rise of social media. And this becomes very, very crucial, because this means that government's ability to respond, or religious organizations' abilities, or religious believers' ability to respond to some of these conflicts become even more limited, because a post can go viral so quickly. I mean, that's the definition of viral, right? And a tweet can go viral so quickly, it can be screenshot, it can be transmitted infinitely to an infinite number of people. And under those conditions, we're talking about sort of this, any clash or conflict becomes amplified, aggravated, and accelerated in this manner that that creates consequences, that one may not be able to sort of hold back so easily. So the resolution that comes from those types of rights conflict need to be much faster in order to respond to some of these issues. So one sort of example of this is when offensive statements are being made. Some will consider some of these offensive statements to be hate speech, for instance. So offensive statements can be made against religion, thereby offending religious groups. And in that offense, if it's hate speech, could also undermine the freedom of religious practice by affecting the dignity of persons, religious persons. Offensive statements could also be made by religion and undermine other freedoms and offend other religious groups. So it could undermine other freedoms by other groups, and it could also offend other religious groups. So when social media comes in, it means that there is an amplification, aggravation, acceleration, and the spread of such statements, which can lead to greater harms being perpetrated much more quickly. If you went and Google viral posts or viral videos and religious offense, you will get a plethora, a multitude of news headlines. What I have here is just a very tiny sampling of these incidents. Medan YouTuber sentenced to prison for insulting Prophet Muhammad's wife in a viral video. France embroiled in blasphemy controversy after teen posts viral anti-Islam video. Transgender Malaysian gets death threats, disappears after Facebook video appears to show her renouncing Islam. And even if you had an old video that didn't go viral the first time, it could go viral later on if someone finds it. So old video showing a rapper insulting Hinduism goes viral on social media. There are real world consequences to much of these online content. It could result in criminal prosecution. It could result in serious bodily harm. So when you have speech that is offensive against other religions, this could then raise a question of whether, if the speech is religious, is there religious freedom to make that speech, okay? Or is there necessarily a limit because of the need to protect other religions? In addition, besides religious offense, you also have offensive religion coming up, not just in the form of making statements about other religions, but in the form of making statements about other groups. And so this raises yet again another stark conflict. Is there a freedom of religious speech that can be used as a defense against fundamental freedoms of others, such as equality of persons? And much of this current conflict arises when religious personalities make certain statements about homosexuals, for instance. This is again just a small sample. This is just one sample. In Australia, where there was a rugby player, a national rugby player, who made this Instagram post, which talks about, which basically recites apparently a Bible verse and talks about how this group of people would be sent to hell when because of their conduct. Now, this raised a firestorm in Australia as to whether this is hate crime against homosexuals, or whether this should be protected by religious freedom guarantees and free speech guarantees. So you see that sort of conflict between religious freedom and freedom of expression, religious expression, and equality sort of become clashing in a very public way. Because what social media does is that it creates outrage in a very public fashion, such that more people are outraged and more people on both sides of the aisle. So what does this mean in terms of religious freedom? Well, we've always sort of, had to grapple with the question of religious offense. As Professor Masum Billah mentioned, we have this book on religious offense in common law Asia, which talks about the penal code of common law countries and how it criminalizes the insulting of religion and the prejudicing of religious harmony. Now, is this hate speech, and how do we resolve this? Now, I'm not going to sort of go into how these clashes can or cannot be resolved, but to sort of mention that what social media does is to ensure that all sides are outraged and therefore create very soft, more heightened, if you like, heightened conditions for these conflicts to play out. And this, on one hand, can actually force governments to react or overreact to some of these statements made. The second way in which religious freedom is sort of being transformed by social media is perhaps to some extent for some considered to be a positive one. As mentioned, religious freedom has a multitude of content, but underlying religious freedom is the idea that it is a guarantee for religious individuals and religious groups to protect themselves against government overreach. Okay, it's individual protection or group protection against the state. And so one way in which social media could be transforming the way religious freedom is experienced is that it provides new avenues for religious individuals and religious groups to resist government overreach. And so there is research suggesting that access to social media could encourage citizens to be more politically active. Now, this is because social media is a powerful platform to disseminate information outside of the strictures of mainstream media and government oversight. And so you can use social media to disrupt existing political structures and as tools for collective mobilization. It could also be used, and therefore it could be used effectively by marginalized groups to start social media campaigns to disseminate information about religious persecution. So it becomes an added sort of way in which guarantees of religious freedom could be asserted against the government. Now, this is not always effective. Actually, Hu and Yang in a 2019 piece talked about the limited use of social media by religious groups in China. Among the factors that they raise is because that there isn't sufficient consensus that religious freedom is an important right to begin with, among other things. Lastly, I think this is something that deserves a lot more conceptual reflection, and it is that social media is dissolving public-private dichotomies that used to be essential to conventional ideas of secularism and religious freedom claims. Again, religious freedom is about individuals and groups making claims against government overreach. Okay, the idea that the state should not be telling me how to practice my religion, the state should not be telling me what religion to follow, how to manage my internal affairs, and so on. But that presumes that there is some division that one could make. And under certain conventional ideas about secularism, there is the claim that religion is privatized because it is outside of government regulation. If there was even some truth in this idea that religion could be privatized, I think social media is exploding that possibility, because religion can no longer see itself as being practiced in a private sanctuary within a private space. Today, as religion becomes digitalized, we are seeing religion becoming more public. Remember, one of the key features about social media is that it is publicly available. Even if you had a private Facebook account, you will still have friends. Friends can screenshot anything you write, and that screenshot can be disseminated. So if there was any sort of idea that religion could be private, that should no longer be the case as long as religion is available on social media platforms. So social media content is publicly available and is not just for believers, which means that religious practice is being judged for its content and its tone and so on, not just by its own believers, but by a general public. The wide reach that social media allows is also enhancing the likelihood for misunderstanding and offense. There can no longer be an expectation of private religion. Now, I'll give you two examples and instances whereby seemingly sort of private or limited religious content were shared beyond the initial intended audience, creating offense, and then these religious leaders having to sort of dial back or walk back their statements. So in this, for instance, there was an online video of a pastor and of a Christian pastor, which offended Buddhists and Taoists. And so these online videos, I would say, might not have been seen to be, when they put up these online videos, he may not have intended them to be disseminated widely, but they were, and they caused offense to those who were not part of his community. Another example, much more recent, was of this imam who in his prayer said, "God help us against Jews and Christians." And a video of this was circulated, and he was charged in court for sort of offending religious harmony, for prejudicing religious harmony. So what does this mean? This means that, again, so let me emphasize that even if a communication is made within a church, within a mosque, within sort of the temple, there's always the possibility that this communication could actually be disseminated outside because of the ease with which social media is allowing this dissemination of information. So we must see each communication as potentially public. So in this piece by Van Dijk, he talks about how social media platforms have unquestionably altered the nature of private and public communication. Things that used to be sort of informal, ephemeral manifestations of social life, chats, and so on, can always be screenshot and disseminated beyond its original audience. And so this means that religious content, religious speech, all of that has to be thought through as potentially public. So in the conclusion, I think that we haven't yet quite carefully reflected, in my view, on what social media and this level of digitalization requires in terms of rethinking religious freedom and freedoms in general. In this brave new world of social media, we need a way to think about freedoms as no longer bound by this public-private divide, but as something that needs to be carefully managed through a multitude of different approaches. And so laws cannot no longer just be updated in some ways, or they have to be updated, but they have to be updated in light of the realities that we see today. And so for good or for worse, social media is here to stay and is transforming our lives, the way we interact with one another. It is transforming the way we think about religion, the way religion is experienced, and it is and will continue to transform the fundamental freedoms that we experience, including religious freedom. Thank you very much. So I'm not sure if we have some time for questions or if
Thank you so
we'll
much.
be taking questions.
We have received a few questions, so I think due to the constraint of time, we'll be taking 2 questions, which I have with me. So the first question is asked by Mr. Muhammad Alim, Professor of Law of Rajshahi University. His question more focuses on the media literacy and awareness program, as he comments that he thinks the younger generation has this responsibility of a responsible behavior on social media about religion. So he asked, how can we extend these legal minds to the police, lawyers, and judges? This is his questions and we have another question which more focuses that social media is a place where the dissemination of information is very quick at one hand, and in the other hand, the violation of right to religion is increasing. So is there a way, a middle ground in which we can put a strong protection against violation of right to religion in social media? Dr. Jaclyn.
Right. Thank you. Can I just clarify, the first question was about media literacy for judges and lawyers?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So these are really good questions. And in some ways they are interrelated. I think media literacy is key. Because I think many of these issues that we face with regards to social media and the virality of it, and the offense is very much something that cannot be fully addressed through law. Law is not fast enough. If you think about it, by the time the law comes in to when a person is charged, when a person is hauled to court and all of that for an offensive statement, it is too late. The statement is gone. The viral post has gone viral. So in a sense, media literacy has to include I suppose what in the ideal world should include, how can we interact with one another respectfully? And this is very difficult because if you think about the conditions and the characteristics of a post that goes viral, what kind of posts go viral? The more outrageous the post is, the greater the likelihood of the post getting more attention. So for posts to go viral, there is a certain outrage component that is often involved. So how do we mitigate this is not oftentimes a matter of law. Law can set the boundaries of those proper behavior. And I think law should set those boundaries about how you should not outrage people just for the sake of outraging people, right? But I think the idea that we should be educating people, enhancing media literacy is key. How do you extend that to lawyers and judges? I don't know. I don't think lawyers and judges are necessarily the ones who are outraging others, right? We're usually quite careful about what we say. I often tell my students to write posts as if they would be cross-examined on it in court. So always be very careful about what emails you write and so on. But I think at least for lawyers and judges, there is a necessity for them to understand how social media works and the way in which the transmission can be very quick. So that goes to the second question about how is there a middle ground between social media's going viral, the violations increasing, and so on. Again, I think that this law can set the boundaries of what is appropriate behavior, and where there is something very egregious, something should be done about it. My view is that law should only come in when it's very egregious. There needs to be something in between. So something that we do in Singapore, which I kind of like, is community reconciliation. So say a person creates a post, it gets disseminated, it's outrageous, and it's offensive to a religious community. You could say law comes in, charges a person for religious offense, or under 298 of the Section 298 of the Penal Code and so on. But there's something in between that has been sort of formalized in law in Singapore, and it's called the Community Reconciliation Initiative, which means that the person who wrote the post has an option of offering some level of reconciliatory measures to the offended community. This could involve, for instance, them coming together for community events, apologies being made, coming together to sort of understand each other's religions better. So as an example, if you recall Imam Nala, who was actually charged, after the weekend before he was charged, he actually offered his apologies to the Christian and Jewish communities. So that actually is more effective in creating reconciliation and in addressing these type of social media posts than just straight out criminalization. So that would be my answer.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jaclyn. I believe it was an absolute mesmerizing and fascinating 50 minutes and a bliss to everybody's ears and minds who are actually listening to the speech today. And now I'd like to invite to deliver his speech. I'd like to invite Professor Dr. Mizanur Rahman, President ELCOP, to deliver his speech on today's memorial lecture. So the floor is yours. Sir, can you hear us? We can't hear you because I think you were muted, sir. I believe sir is facing an issue.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry for joining a bit late, but the host was delaying in giving me entry, so I had to wait a bit. But nonetheless, let me begin with extending my heartiest felicitations and gratitude to Professor Jaclyn for a wonderful intervention, for a wonderful presentation on freedom of religion and interest in freedom of expression and how the social media has changed our ideas on religion and religious practices. And I think the two questions that were asked after the presentation, I don't think that it is confined only with these two questions. I'm pretty confident that there are, scores of questions in the minds of the audience present here, but probably precisely because of the time constraint, I think the organizers have chosen only a few questions and probably left it. And I'm pretty sure that they'll be forwarding you, Jaclyn, questions for you to delve on, and so that the persons asking the questions can have a kind of a response from you too, for them to understand some of the statements, some of the theses that you have presented today, which probably need a further in detail and in-depth analysis in order for us to truly understand the rationale that you are proposing and the explanations that you are giving. Dear audience, let me begin with probably the finishing statement by Professor Jaclyn. And she mentions very explicitly that social media platforms have unquestionably altered the nature of private and public communications. I think this is the truth often for today. And from this truth, based on this truth, we need to probably analyze and dissect even stand and but in doing so, the problem is that when we're talking about the role of the social media platforms, how social media is impacting our behavior, both internal and external behavior, then how much this behavior is to be, I don't know, how do you really tally it with religious belief and practices is a very delicate thing to I think, understand and to espouse. Let me just give you this simple example that religion is all about a belief. Is this belief being transformed by social media platforms? Is this belief being transferred or impacted by the way that you're having the different kind of posts and the blogs or the writings in different forms of social media platform? Or is it simply a media, the platforms they're using in order to espouse some of the thoughts that you think to be correct or incorrect, and that you're spreading to the society at large? And any kind of sensitive ideas that you are sort of espousing to the outside world would have either a positive or a negative impact. So whether it happens in Denmark, or whether it happens in Paris, or whether it happens in Dhaka, Bangladesh, the impact is almost the same. But when we're talking about and relating it, the use of the social media in the religious form and correlating with religious practices and beliefs, are we really, focusing on religion itself, or are we really talking about the abuse of the freedom of expression and how it is impacting the behavior of the, general citizenry or the individuals who are living their life in a particular society? So this is something probably that needs to be more closely examined, because whether this social media or digitization is relating to transformation of religious practices, I think that is a very big question to which we need even more in-depth analysis and research in order to find an answer. However, the freedom of religion, as you mentioned, Jaclyn, that the freedom of religion, and you show the consensus in international law. The problem is that you are focusing precisely on the freedom of religion and religious beliefs. But is it possible to a bit stretch the idea of freedom and this freedom of religion to incorporate the freedom not to profess any religion also? And this freedom of not to profess any religion, shouldn't that be also considered as part of the freedom of religion? Let me just take you back to 19th century, when the son-in-law of none else than Karl Marx was asked the question that which religion you practice, and he answers, well, I'm an atheist. And so the questioner retorts back, and what is atheism? What does that mean? What is this religion? Well, atheism means that I don't believe in any religion. I don't believe in any God. And so the first questioner, he responds, oh, then atheism must be your religion. So you see, so whether this freedom not to profess any religion, whether that needs to be also incorporated under the texture of freedom of religion, is something that needs to be understood, in a present day context. Because, and the same goes, you see, when you are taking a human rights based approach, then I would probably prefer that the freedom of religion also include the freedom not to profess any religion, in this sense that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in his famous 4 Freedoms speech back in 1941, he referred to the freedom to worship God in his or her own way everywhere on earth. And that freedom to worship God also included the freedom not to worship any God in their own ways anywhere on earth. I think these are the questions that probably requires, I think, an in-depth analysis. I understand that within the time that you were allotted, obviously it's not possible, humanly possible, to address all those queries and the questions that come up. But let me thank you and give you a very big thank you for a wonderful presentation to enlighten us on a very critical issue, which is of, I would say, extreme relevance in today's Bangladesh, for our polity, for our society, and for the things that are happening around us in the present days. However, Jaclyn, I'd be taking leave with probably one observation that you seem to private religion. And this is where personally I am having a kind of difficulty in accepting this notion of the difference between public and private religions. I believe that when we want to make religion public, that's where the problem begins. That's where discrimination towards other religions begin. That's where the ooze of the present society lie. Religion had always been a private affair. And I think modern democracy requires that religion and religious practices be understood in private terms so that my belief does not affect your belief. My practices do not negatively impact your practices, so that it is in the private sphere, and therefore the state must restrain itself to patronize any particular religion or religious practices. That should be the ground rule of a nurtured democracy, a human rights way of accommodating everyone and leaving no one behind. So with these few words, once again, Professor Jaclyn Neo, a very big thank you once again to you for a wonderful presentation and giving us this opportunity of delving into a very complicated world of beliefs and non-believing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Dr. Mizanur Rahman. Dr. Jaclyn, I'll be reverting back to you in brief if you have any closing remarks on the lecture.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for those remarks. Spot on. I would say I agree with you, so my remarks will be very brief. Yes, I think that if we look at the international consensus, again, this is contested by some countries, including countries such as, for instance, Malaysia, Indonesia, and a few others. The right to religious belief does include, according to this international consensus, the right not to believe. So if we look at General Comment number 22 on the ICCPR, it clearly states that it should include the right to be an atheist, the right not to believe and not to be coerced to have any belief. So very much so, thank you for that, for pointing that out, that is a very important clarification. Now that's also very interesting because if we look at the statistics, in some countries, the religious nuns are actually expanding. We're talking about more people in certain countries, including in Singapore, identifying as not belonging to any religions, which means that we need to engage with this segment and ensure that they too are protected in under sort of any constitutional regime. The other is the, you mentioned public-private religion. And yes, I think that perhaps maybe I could modify a little bit what I understand you to be saying. I think that when I say public religion, I'm not necessarily saying state religion. I am making a distinction between public religion, meaning religion that engages in the public sphere as possibly sort of non-state entities, but actually engaging in a democratic discourse about what the public good should look like. And I think that oftentimes there is, well, at least within certain scholarship, the claim that religion should not have a voice in democratic discourse. And I think that that itself can be very problematic because of the fact that certain religions, for two reasons. One, I think that to sort of exclude certain groups from engaging in democratic discourse can itself be very undemocratic. And secondly, if we exclude religious views from the democratic sphere, then that also means that we're insulating religious views from any necessity to engage with sort of values within society, which means that we are sort of allowing them to do whatever they want. So that itself can also be very problematic. And so when I say public religions, I really mean the fact that if there was this sphere whereby religions could do whatever they want, that is no longer the case. that the social media is sort of transforming whatever sphere there is, such that any private action has now the potential to become public. And in some ways it is good, because any potential abuse within sort of groups can be exposed. On the other hand, this also means that some statements that religious groups engage in, when religious leaders or religious individuals provide exposition on certain parts of the sacred text, it could be misconstrued. And it has, in some jurisdictions, been misconstrued. I mean, I can take a video of someone saying something, cut it up, slice it up, and it will sound something completely different. So those types of potential abuse also need to be grappled with if we were to take religious freedom seriously. So in short, I agree with both your interventions. So thank you very much for them.
Thank you so much, both Professor Dr. Mizanur Rahman again and Dr. Jaclyn again. Now I'd like to move for the vote of thanks, and I'd like to call Barrister Tapas Kanti Baul, Prosecutor, International Crimes Tribunal Bangladesh, and Executive Director, ELCOP, to deliver the vote of thanks to the speaker.
Arni, you need to allow Barrister Tapas in the room. Azhar, you need to allow Barrister Tapas to be in. Barrister Tapas, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Actually, we have nothing to say in the vote of thanks after such a wonderful presentation by Professor Dr. Jaclyn Neo. It was very in-depth discussion on the present context of social media and the freedom of religion, freedom of thought, and the associated matters. So from our side, from ELCOP side, we are very much thankful to Professor Dr. Jaclyn Neo for her time and her valuable speech as well. And also through you, we like to thank CALS of National University of Singapore for their assistance as well. Then I would like to thank ELCOP's president, Professor Dr. Mizanur Rahman sir, for allowing us to organize this second Moot competition in the name of Professor Shalom sir, our dear founder of ELCOP. Then I would like to thank Dr. Billah for his time and cooperation in organization these mooting competition, and especially the lecture. Then I would like to thank Azhar and Arni for relentlessly working to make it possible. I'd like to thank all the members of the executive committee of ELCOP, the audience, and the participants who will be participating in the moot court competition. So without further ado, I would welcome you all in the next session, in the inaugural session. And thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, sir. And with this warm note of gratefulness, I think we will end today's memorial lecture. And as sir has said, I'll say again, we will be starting the inaugural session of second Professor Shah Alam Constitutional Law Virtual Moot Court Competition in a few minutes. It starts from 4:30. So I invite everyone to join the inaugural session. And thank you again for being with us today from Bangladesh and from all around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaclyn. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. And
Thank
good luck
you.
to all the participants for the Moot competition.
Thank you, sir.
I'm afraid I have to run because it is 6:30 on my side,
Yeah,
and I have to go get the children.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.